Exodus chapter 20, verses 1 and 2. And God spoke all these words, saying, I am the Lord your God, who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of slavery. Imagine that you're talking with one of your friends, and as you are talking, the subject of Christianity comes up. And as you're talking with your friend about Christianity, your friend says, you know, you Christians, you have all of these rules that you have to follow. Rules that take all of the fun out of life. That's why I don't want to be a Christian, is because I would have to do all of these different things that I don't particularly want to do. How would you respond to your friend if your friend said that to you? It's sad that a lot of Christians wouldn't know how to respond. But there's something that is even more sad than that. There are a lot of Christians who think about the Ten Commandments, who think about the laws that God has given to them, and they have an opinion of the Ten Commandments that are much like that of the non-Christian. They look at the Ten Commandments and say, these are 10 rules that take all of the fun out of my life. That's not how God intended us to look at these rules. The Ten Commandments are not meant to ruin all of your fun, but they are guidelines to help you live life to the fullest. They are guidelines that will help you to experience God as you should and to have better relationships with other people. These are not chains that bind us, but rather they are a declaration of our freedom in Christ. Today we are going to look at the prologue to the Ten Commandments. We're going to look at Exodus chapter 21 and 2, and we're going to see three things in these verses. We're going to see the history of freedom, we're going to see the law of freedom, and we're going to see the salvation of freedom. And the first thing that we need to do is to remember what is going on with the people of Israel. Last week we talked about the things that were going on in chapter 19, and we talked about the thick cloud that had come around all of Israel, so that a thick cloud that was dark and terrible and foreboding. And then we also talked about the lightning that was stretched out across the sky. We talked about the thunder that came along with the lightning. We talked about the fire that came down from the sky, signaling God's presence in wrath. And we talked about how that fire caused smoke to come up from Mount Sinai. We talked about how the entire mountain trembled greatly. So beyond these other signs that were going on, they also had a terrible earthquake that was going on and shaking them. And then beyond all of these things, there was the sound of the trumpet. The sound of the trumpet announcing God's judgment. It became louder and louder so that it was drowning out the other sounds that were going on around them. And the people trembled in fear. And Moses trembled in fear. We expect from these things that are going on that Israel is about to be destroyed. And Israel probably felt like it was about to be destroyed. They thought that God was going to take them out because of their sin. There's another reason that we might be expecting destruction in Israel besides just these signs that are going on around Israel, and that is because of the idea of covenant that we see here. These people would have been familiar with the idea of covenant. They would have been familiar with the idea of a big king coming in and taking over the territory of a little king and making that little king subject to him. And a covenant would have announced that sort of thing. Most of the time when a big king comes in and takes over the territory of a little king, the little king doesn't gain a whole lot by the covenant. There is usually the idea that the big king will protect the little king, but also the little king is going to at least expect to pay very high taxes to the big king. But there's something else that would have been even more common. that little king would have often been made a slave of the big king. And so the little king might have been told that he had to build all these different building projects for the big king. The little king and all of his people would have had to do whatever the other people wanted them to do, even if they didn't want to do it. So they were often made slaves. So what are the people of Israel expecting? They see destruction going on around them. They may be hoping for slavery at the very best. But what did they find in Exodus 21 and 2? God spoke all of these words saying, I am the Lord your God who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of slavery. This isn't a normal king that we're dealing with. This king isn't setting out to enslave the people, but rather he is the king who sets the people free from their slavery. God is the one who is the liberator. God is the one who calls a people to himself and sets them free from slavery. And he reminds them of one of the central picture of freedom in the Old Testament, the time in which he brought them out of Egypt, out of the house of slavery. This is something that would have come up in their minds, something that would have been deep in their hearts, something that would have been a part of their culture, something that would have been a part of their normal conversation. If you were to talk with an average Jewish person at this time about what God was like and how he treated his people, then one of the things that would have come up very, very quickly in that conversation is that person would mention that their God is the one who set his people free from slavery in Egypt. And throughout the Old Testament, whenever salvation is mentioned, you can pretty much expect the idea of the people being set free from Egypt to come up. It comes up again and again throughout the prophets. It comes up again and again throughout the Psalms. It's not only the central event in the first 5 books of the Bible, but it is something that stretches out throughout the entire Old Testament. God is the one who saves his people from slavery. And so God is calling them to remember that history, remember how he has treated them. And if they were to really remember that history would not have begun in Egypt, but it would have begun even before that. Even before God set them free from Egypt, he prophesied that he would set them free many, many years beforehand. Genesis chapter 12. Now the Lord said to Abraham, go from your country and your kindred and your father's house to the land that I will show you. And I will make of you a great nation, and I will bless you and make your name great, so that you will be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you, and him who dishonors you I will curse. And in you all of the families of the earth will be blessed. Then the Lord appeared to Abram and said, to your offspring I will give this land. So way back in Genesis chapter 12, God is making a promise to Abraham. And God is saying, I am going to bless you and I'm going to give you a land. Now you're going to have to wait for it a little while. It's something that is ultimately going to be possessed by your descendants, by your offspring. But I am going to give you this land. And beyond that, I'm going to make you into a great nation. And from this nation, the entire world is going to be blessed. Even places as far away as Okinawa in America. And then a little bit later, in Genesis chapter 15, God says these words to Abraham. Know for certain that your offspring will be sojourners, that means travelers, in a land that is not theirs, and will be servants there. And they will be afflicted for 400 years.